think we're all set. Let me make you host. All right, and the floor is all yours, Zach.
Great. Do we want to maybe wait one more minute if anyone else is showing up a second later too? Yeah,
Sure.
I think I'll give everyone a minute or two to trickle in.
All right, cool. Question, Zach, do you want to use the survey that we used previously?
Yeah, it's been about 3 months, so maybe I'll take a quick peek and just see if there's any other questions that I want to add. But
okay,
after I do that, we could use the same one.
Okay, cool.
So I'll let you know later today.
All right, I'm off this afternoon, so if I don't respond, I'll definitely reach out on Monday.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
No problem.
While we wait one more minute, does anyone have any questions from last week's session or maybe the coding challenges? How'd they go? Good, bad, super easy, kind of challenging? Got a thumbs up, that's good. Great. Well, we can go ahead and get started. I will share my screen. Scooch on over here. There we go. Well, hello everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for joining again today. For those that weren't here last week, I don't know if there's anyone new, but this is just to introduce either way. This is part 2 of our 2-part live coding interview workshop. My name is Zach. I'm an alumni of the boot camp from June 2020, currently working as a data scientist at an analytics startup. I've been there for almost 1.5 years now. So what we're really trying to do here is give you an idea of what these live coding interviews are like, and some tips and tricks to some strategies to approach the interviews with, and practice, of course, lots and lots of practice. So last week we talked in part 1, we talked about what to expect. What are these interviews really like? What's the structure? Where are you going to be doing your coding? How does it actually work, just from a structural point of view, which I thought hopefully was useful, because my first few interviews, I was just like, wow, this is a weird place to be in, and I have to solve a problem. Hopefully this took a little bit of mystery out of the weird place to be in part, and then you can just focus on solving the problem. This week, we are going to focus more on what makes a successful interview. So some tips, some strategies, some things that I've seen from the field that work really well, on top of just, being able to code and solve the problem. And just like last week, this week we'll have a practice component as well. So we've got a whole new set of SQL and Python, actually 2 sets of Python challenges for you. So we'll spend a little bit of time with some lecture component and some Q&A, and then spend more time, hopefully, with actual practice, because to me, that's the most important part. And we'll set you off into breakout rooms just like last week. Great. So before I get started, any questions? Also, I believe there was someone in the group who had a live coding interview lined up between last week's session and this week's session. Was that true, or did I kind of make that up? I do make things up from time to time. Cool, then maybe not. Well, if so, I hope it went well.
James. James just in the chat. It was him.
Cool. Well, James, if you don't mind, was it a thumbs up? Did it go okay, or maybe need a little more practice, more preparation? How'd it go?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. I think it went pretty well. I find out today or Monday if I go to the next one.
Awesome. That's great to hear. First one is nerve-wracking, and for me they got slightly less nerve-wracking every single time. So to have a positive experience so early on, that's great. Good to hear. And hopefully with more practice, they're just, well, hopefully you never have to do one ever again because you just get this job. So with that, we can jump in. What makes a successful interview? Well, first and foremost, of course, solving the problem. If you're able to solve the problem, you'll probably pass. If not, your chances are less likely. That's just what we're dealing with here. It's a test. But in my eyes, there's more to it than that. There are things that can either separate the good candidates from the great candidates, and also perhaps save your interview if you don't perfectly solve the problem. And I say this from experience. I had two specific instances where I didn't finish all the questions, or I didn't perfectly solve the problem, like didn't make it to the very end, but I still passed on to the next round. And I believe it was because of these kinds of things. They saw, okay, this guy hasn't been coding for 12 years, fine, but he has these other skills and showed the ability to go through these other things that was enough to kind of push me on to the next round. So what are those things? Similar to the tips that I gave last week, but we'll go into a little bit more detail. First thing is not rushing into solutions without thinking or planning, right? You don't want to show that you're the kind of data professional that goes straight into machine learning without validating anything, or without coming up with any sort of plan, or without doing any sort of thought beforehand. I see a lot of candidates often nervous, jump straight into coding as if they're just supposed to know the answer the second they get a question. And that's just not really how our brains work. So it's always nice to see a candidate who takes a question, lets it sink in a little bit, and comes up with some sort of plan, or at least spend some time thinking about what they're going to do before jumping into the code, making mistakes, having to go back and fix those mistakes. It's not to say if you spend a minute thinking you're not going to make mistakes, that's totally fine. But it's always a little bit more like it shows more confidence and more structure, and then helps you actually do a better job and focus on solving instead of rushing around and trying to fix all the mistakes that you made because you didn't spend some time thinking. So that's the first thing, not rushing in without thinking or planning, taking that minute, breathing, like I should do, breathe. Second is contextual awareness or business sense. Maybe not so much in like a Python algorithm question, right? If someone asks you to write a function that deduplicates a list, well, there's not much business context in deduplicating a list. Like that's just a puzzle, and that's fine. You'll have some interviews like that. But in like often SQL interviews or any interview that has some sort of data component, maybe you're reading in CSVs into a Jupyter notebook and you have real data to work with in Python. There's many chances to show that you can think about this more than just writing code to solve a puzzle. This is an analytical problem that has an end user, someone who's going to be reading the solutions or something like that. And that's on your mind. That's something that you're thinking about. That's something that you have present as you're working through every single data problem that you have. So some examples, things like if you have a customers table and an orders table and you want to join those two, well, do you want to include customers that didn't purchase anything? That would be a left join, right? From customers to orders, so that they still show up. That's something that could be interesting to the business. Or if it's like an analytical question, you're going to print out a whole bunch of scores and the person associated with the score. Maybe you want to order by score descending because whoever's going to read this output will want to see the highest scores first. These are things that aren't necessarily explicitly asked in the interview or in the problem that's given to you. But if you incorporate this sort of thing, it shows that you can think about these data problems, these coding problems, on a bit of a higher level, something that's going to be more useful in a business context. It often comes up in questions, in follow-up questions. So someone gives you a problem, you spend a minute thinking about it, and you're like, oh, this is a thought. Do we want to include customers that didn't purchase anything? And you ask that as a question to the interviewer. Or maybe you just make the choice like, I'm going to order by score descending here because that'll probably be more useful to the business user. But it's all about, having that higher level of thought and being able to communicate that and put it into your solutions. And then finally, communication. I think you can kind of see how each of these work into communication a little bit, and we're going to get more into it in the next slide. But communication to me is super important because when you're in the real world, when you are a member of some sort of data team, it's just that you're a member of a team and you'll have your own work to do, right? You'll have your problems to solve and there will be a lot of individual work, but then you'll have to talk about it. You'll have to tell people what you did, and you'll have problems, and you'll have to communicate about those problems to get help. And other people will have problems and they'll come to you. So they'll be talking about their code and you'll have to kind of work through it in a back and forth way. I see the live coding interview as a bit of a hidden test for that, to say, can this person work well on a data team? Can they communicate about their code? Can they communicate about data effectively? Now, before we get any further on that, I have to make one giant hands waving disclaimer. If the thought of focusing on communication during a live coding interview gives you any sort of anxiety, don't worry about it. Do not worry about it. Don't even think about it, because again, the main thing is solving the problem. And for me, the main thing to give you the best chance to solve the problem is to just be comfortable. If you want to practice coding challenges for every single day for hours and be super, super good at solving the problem, that's good. That's a great way to go. If this kind of if these communication bits are not really your style or not what makes you comfortable, totally fine. But if you find yourself kind of wanting to take it to that next level, these are good things to practice as well and good things to think about. So we're about to get into a lot more detail about communication. Before I get into that, does anyone have any high-level thoughts or questions on these first 3 tips? Great. So I've put together a list of things to say. Did someone come off mute, or am I making things up? Making things up, that's totally fine. So I put together a list of things that actual things to say that I found myself saying in interviews, and also found the most successful candidates saying in the interviews that I've conducted with them. And we can kind of go through them one by one. First thing, you're given a question. I almost always like to repeat the question and ask follow-up questions. If we go back here, that accomplishes 2 things. One, it gives you a chance to let the question sink in. You're not rushing. You're going to kind of think about it and come up with some sort of plan, because you're just giving it more time before putting your fingers on the keyboard. And 2, the follow-up questions give you a chance for contextual awareness or business sense, just like the examples I gave before. That is you not being totally sure about what the interviewer wants to see and communicating what information you need in order to get to your solution. So if anything's on your mind, if anything's unsure, totally kosher to ask follow-up questions. Accomplishes multiple things. It makes you more comfortable and know what you need to do. Also shows that you can communicate about these things. Next is one of my favorites, all-time favorites. So I'll read through it and then talk about why. Quote, normally I would check for blank. Data size, nulls, unique primary keys, those kinds of things. Is that a good use of time for this exercise, or can we assume the data is clean? Now, why is this so awesome? On one hand, you're going to score some points with the interviewer here, where they're going to see that you are careful, you know what kind of things go wrong with the data, and you want to check for them. Every time you come to a new data set, you want to check for them. So they're going to say, oh, that's good. That's the kind of person we want. On the other hand, they're probably going to say, especially in a SQL test, no, it's okay. We can assume the data's clean, and you can just kind of move on with the solutions. So you're going to score all kinds of points and not really have to do anything. That's why I love saying this every time I'm presented with a new data set. On the other hand, if they say yes, we should be checking for these kinds of things, you now know that that's part of the test and you know what you have to do now. So I've had other tests where they say, yes, that's a good use of time here. We should definitely check for those things. And then I spend time checking for those things. I pass all those parts of the test, whereas otherwise I might not have even looked. So this is something I really, really like for multiple reasons. Next, super important. Again, you want to be careful. You want to be methodical. Actually saying, can I take a minute to collect my thoughts? The answer will always be yes, and this will always be helpful. It might be a little awkward the first couple times you do it, right? Because now it's going to be quiet. You're in an interview and no one's talking and no one's doing anything, and that's fine. That's part of it. This is how you would approach it in real life, right? If you're given some sort of problem that you have to solve with code, you're going to take a minute to collect your thoughts. So it's a really good practice to do that in the interview as well. Again, you want to be comfortable. You want this to all feel comfortable. So mirroring how you would normally solve a problem, which is probably taking a minute to collect your thoughts, that's a good thing to do. So you've taken a minute, you've collected your thoughts, you come up with some sort of plan. I often like, if there's any level of complexity, if it's a super simple problem, you might not have to take this step. But as the test goes on, the questions might get harder. I like to introduce what I'm going to do a little bit. My initial plan for this problem is blank. And not walking through every single line of code, just kind of giving an idea of the kinds of steps I'm going to take. So I'm going to join these two tables, and then I'm going to group by this column and do an aggregation that will, solve whatever the question is. I'm not walking them through every single line. I'm just giving them an idea of what I want to do. Why is this important? Well, one, again, being able to communicate about your code, showing that you can work on a data team in that sort of way. That's nice. That's definitely a place where you can score some points. But also, putting you and your interviewer on the same page is always a good thing. They're going to be watching you code, and they're going to be trying to decipher what you're doing. That's their job, right? That's their job while they're conducting this interview. If you make their job easier, they'll be thankful, they'll be happy. And that's always a good thing, to make your interviewer happy. So that's why I kind of like to walk through the bare bones of the plan. But then there's this big because. This is about showing business context. Anytime you have a choice to make, I'm doing a left join instead of an inner join. I'm going to group by this instead of that. Do this aggregation instead of that aggregation. You don't have to do this every single time, but when it seems like a kind of more important decision, give the because. Give the because. Say why. It's a chance to show that business context, why you're making decisions that you might be making. And also makes it more of a conversation with the interviewer. Cool. Briefly touch on this. This is something we talked about last week. Say you're going through your solution and you just forgot the silly syntax for one tiny thing. All I need to know is blank, the syntax for a window function. Do you mind if I Google it quickly? The answer will always be yes. Or do you mind if I check my notes real quick? The answer will be yes. That's fine, because that's how we work in a day-to-day data world. So it would be terrible for them to expect you to not work like that in a live coding interview. So always feel free to use your resources, but it's also good to kind of introduce, hey, this is the one thing I'm missing. I'm going to go look that up right now. And this last little bit here, this is for when you are stuck. It might happen. It is not the end of the world. It's not the end of your test. It's definitely not the end of the world. often the questions are hard and they're meant to stump you in some sort of way. So this is an important point when you can show how you work through a difficult problem. I think I'm getting blocked here. Blank means kind of try and explain where you are getting blocked. Like I said before, when you're working on a data team, you are going to have problems. You are going to get blocked by something, and you're going to have to get help. And that means you're going to have to go to the team and explain what is going wrong, explain what you've tried, those kinds of things. So just this one step of being able to say like, hey, this is the problem that I can't really solve. This is where I'm blocked. That's going to score you some points. And what do you do from there? Well, of course, just like up here, can I take a minute to collect my thoughts, or I'm going to take a minute to think of a new approach? Again, this is all about, calm, take a deep breath. It's not the end of the world. These are all solvable problems. And often just like taking a minute with silence and thinking is all you really need to have it click and move forward. So actually taking that time in the middle of the interview, totally okay. Now, assume you take some of that time, you still can't quite get it. Here's when you can actually say something like, do you have any thoughts on next steps? Do you have a hint? Spoiler alert, they do. They have the solution, right? The person conducting your interview has the answer. And they will have thoughts on next steps. And here's something that I think is really underutilized by people who they just assume that they have to solve the problem and that's it. Well, again, that's not how it works in the real world. In the real world, if you have a problem and you can't quite solve it, you're going to go to your team for help. And they might have thoughts. They might not have the solution, but they'll have a hint. They'll have an idea. And you have to take that idea and run with it. If you get the chance to show that skill in the live coding interview, someone asked me, hey, do you have any thoughts on next steps? And I say, yeah, why don't you try this thing instead of that thing? And they're like, oh yeah, I see how that could work. And then they go and solve it. That's pretty great. Like that's a great skill to show. So this is all to say, when you are blocked, there is hope. Take a second, explain what's going on, breathe, think about it. If you have to ask for a hint, ask for a hint. That's totally okay. That's totally okay. And one major thing to note, none of this is talking while you code. I have personally made that mistake, and it's just not a good thing to do. No one does that. These are things that you say before you code. Here's what I'm going to do. Or like, I'm going to take a second to collect my thoughts. Or kind of when you've done something and you want to explain a little bit. Oh, I made this choice here because of this reason. This isn't talking while you code. All of this is like, you say something, you code for 10 minutes. You come to another point, you say something else, you code for 5 minutes. Don't feel the pressure to, try and talk and think and code at the same time. That's crazy. And again, another hand-waving disclaimer. If all of this makes you uncomfortable and you don't feel like this is going to help you in a live coding interview, don't worry about it. Most important thing is solving the problem. You need to feel comfortable to solve the problem. But if you feel some space to practice with this stuff and incorporate this, it can be helpful. Any questions before we move forward? I have one little thing to do before we get into the actual exercises of the day. But any questions or comments before we get into that?
I have a quick question.
Yeah, of course.
Just two of the guys had mentioned that they had like coding challenges that were recorded, not necessarily live with the person, but they're still like expected, like they're watching you solve the problem, watching your screen. Do you have advice for like how to self-narrate those?
That's super interesting.
A little bit less of a conversation, but you still are expected to communicate. I haven't had one yet. I was just curious if you had advice for that situation.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I've never heard of that, but I can totally see how that's something that would be popular these days, with remote work and Zoom recordings and all that. I think what I would do in that scenario is still do a little bit of communication, but less. Obviously, you're not going to get to this point. Do you have any thoughts on next steps? You won't have to say things like, can I take a minute to collect my thoughts? You'll just do it. But what I might still keep is things like because, or if you get like a chance to show business context, right? I made this decision because blank. That's still useful, and they'll hear what you say and be like, oh yeah, no, that's a good choice, and I understand why you did that. Thank you for explaining it. Or things like if you get blocked, kind of explaining what you think is going wrong, that's still a good chance. That's something that you could still communicate. So I'd say I would tone it down a little bit. I would be narrating less, but overall, I'd still try and fit in some of the most important things, like explaining what I'm doing and why things are going wrong or why things worked, that kind of stuff.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. And Rishi put a great comment, writing out thoughts as comments, like actual comments in the code. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I think that accomplishes much of the same stuff. So that's a great idea as well. Cool. Any other questions? There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to run through an example of a pretty common SQL question, and how I would kind of talk my way through it, and also when I would be coding. So the question is, you have a customers table and a transactions table. What is the average sale price of each customer's most expensive purchase? Side note, this is a super common question, something along these lines. Spoiler alert, it involves a Windows function. I would recommend reading up on that and practicing those. So I'm in an interview, I get this question. First thing I do is I repeat the question. Okay, so we're looking for the average sale price of each customer's most expensive purchase. So one purchase for each customer, and we want to take the average of that. Okay, got it. Just something like that, gives it a second to sink in. Then I would do my favorite thing. Normally I would check for nulls, unique primary keys, and I want to validate this join. Is that a good use of time for this exercise, or can we kind of assume the data is clean and as you would expect it to be? And the interviewer will say, thank you. We love looking for that stuff. But today we can just assume the data is clean. Awesome. So I move on. Can I take a minute to think of a plan? Yes. Now it's quiet, and it will be quiet for a minute. And that's how it's supposed to be. Don't get weirded out. That's how it's supposed to be. Now I have a plan. Here's my initial plan. So I want to join these tables on customer ID, and an inner join is fine because, as you said, the data is clean. It's all as we expect it to be. Then I'm going to use a Windows function to rank purchases, then filter to only include the most expensive ones, and then take the average. I'm not giving them every line of code. This is just an idea of what I'm about to do. Coding, 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 coding. 5 minutes of coding. Great. Oh, shoot. I can't quite remember the exact syntax for a Windows function. Do you mind if I Google it real quick? The answer will be yes. I will go open up a browser. I will Google it. I'll find it. I'll bring it into my solution. They will see all of this happening. I'll run my code. It'll work. I'll find the average. I'll say, great, looks like the average is $151.21. And then I'll get the job. Everyone's happy. Does that make sense? Does that sound good? Any questions or comments about kind of all of those communication bits or how I ran through that example? Awesome, awesome, awesome. So I'm going to stop talking now, and it's your turn. So we have, same as last week, Dropbox link. Courtney, if you could step ahead every single time. Thank you very much. So at this Dropbox link, you should see SQL and Python question files. Let's work on Python today, because last week we worked on SQL. So this week, let's work on Python, and not the Python bonus questions, if those are in there already, just the Python ones. It should be a Jupyter notebook. So here's what we're going to do. Just like last week, we'll put you into breakout rooms. And the key here is to practice having someone watch you code. Try this communication stuff. Take turns, share your screen. You do one question, the other person does the next one. You do one question, the other person does the next one. You have all the time in the world to practice this stuff on your own time. Take this opportunity to practice with another person and make it like a live coding interview. Cool. So I'm about to, oh, looks like these are part one. Courtney, do you have, it looks like this was the link for part one. Do you have part two?
Give me one moment.
Yeah, no worries. In the meantime, I'm just going to start making the breakout rooms.
I hope that's I think it's different. Wait.
Yeah, I sent them, I think, Wednesday night. I can send it again.
Yeah, I uploaded them. I just sent another link. Let's see if this one is it. Yeah, this should be it. Because the bonus question is in there.
Yeah, perfect. There we go.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. So everyone, that second link has a Jupyter notebook, not the bonus one. Let's just work on the normal Python one for now. And I'm about to open up the rooms. So before we get in there, any questions about anything, or does anyone have any technical troubles getting this downloaded and opened up in a Jupyter notebook? Great. Then rooms opening. Best of luck, everyone. Let me know if you have any questions. Cool. How's it going, Courtney? How have you been?
So busy. I've been working as you've been talking. It's just a lot because I'm doing admissions too. So like, yeah, it's just a lot going on. It's been a crazy couple of days. So I'm just trying to get as much done before I'm off in the afternoon. And I may be working over the weekend, but I don't have any plans, so it's fine. How you been?
Busy.
Right.
Busy. Tis the season, I guess.
Yeah, it's a lot going on. It's like when the weather increases and gets better, it seems like the work inclines to.
There's some data behind that, I'm sure.
There has to be. Somebody needs to look into it. I would love to know why.
Well, it's kind of like when the holiday season comes around, work just stops a lot in a lot of ways. It's just less busy and people are less in meetings and taking holidays and time off and all that stuff. And then there's a little bit of the hangover, right? In January, February, we're like, oh, that was really cool when we didn't work so much. And I don't really want to get into everything right away.
Right.
But then March, April time, we start to remember, oh yeah, no, there's stuff that's got to get done. Let's get to it.
Yeah. And then we have an asset review on Monday. So like getting everything done and making sure that it's good for them so that we can stay and remain accredited as well. So yeah, it's been a really crazy past 2 days, but I'm on top of it, like it's not one of those things that is not done, is getting done, is just, getting it done.
Right.
It's always the getting done part, but it's getting there. So I should be fine by the time that I'm off, but I have like a couple of more meetings after I get off this call. I have one more report to do. I finished one while you were talking. So I got one more to do. So yeah.
Wait, you were taking notes on my presentation?
No, not
on practicing.
No, for a report that I need to do. Like I do weekly reports, so I had to send it out. So as you were talking, I was just waiting for you. I was waiting for the cue for when you're saying that you were ready. So as soon as I heard it, I jumped right in, and I had it saved already.
Right.
Yes.
Right. I was just a little offended that you weren't practicing for your upcoming live coding interviews, and
I'm sorry,
hanging on every word.
I wish I understood anything that you guys did. I swear I did. I don't know. Nothing. It makes sense, but it don't make sense.
That's how we feel.
Yeah.
That's the same over here. Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, I won't hold you up. I know you've got a lot to do. So
yes, but I'm here though, if you need me.
Of course. Thank you.
No problem. Question, Zach, is it okay if I can share your email? I feel like I ask you this all the time, but I just want to make sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool.
Like with the students.
Yeah, because I'm creating the follow-up email, so I just want to make sure to include it.
Yeah, and if you have a link to, or actually, I have the link. I'm just going to go real quick and review those.
The interview questions.
Exactly, the survey.
The survey questions. Cool. All right, because I had it in the email, but I'll add it back.
Yeah, no, I'll review that in 5 minutes. I'm sure it's fine. But
Okay,
I'll let you know.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep, of course. Yeah, Courtney, the survey is good to go. I don't think there's anything that I want to add or take away, so it could just be the same one as last time.
Okay, perfect. I'll definitely include it in the follow-up email.
Awesome. Thank you.
My bad. Yeah, what I was saying is that odd indices only ever switch with odd indices because the evens are like fixed points in like the permutation. So you would only need the indexes of all the odd indices, and then you could just permute between the indexes of the odd indices.
Yeah. Okay.
That
It,
might also
is this for question 3 or question 4?
for 4. Sorry.
For 4.
Oh wait,
Yeah.
we're in the public room now. Okay.
Yep. Everyone can hear us.
Okay, great.
Hey,
Hello,
whatever.
everyone.
Good project.
Yeah, that's great. Question 4 was actually a real question that I had in a final round live coding interview, and it was difficult, to be honest. That was probably one of the more difficult questions I've had in Python live coding interviews. So if you feel good about that one, I'd say you're in a really good place. I will also say, if not, that is totally fine. I got that one when I had been studying for these things for months, weeks, if not months. So, what I'll say with any of these is if any of these feel difficult at this point, like if you had this in a real live coding interview and you would just be totally stumped, that's okay. You're getting solutions documents soon. And I would say study the solution, come back to that same problem after studying the solution in a week and see how it goes. And then come back to it again in another week and see how that goes. And everything that you learn from the solution, it starts to cement and you'll be able to use it when something similar comes up later. So Srikar said it's easier to describe a solution than coding it out. I think that's an awesome place to be, because that is the communication side of it. So if you have that, if that feels easy, that's really good. That's really good. And then it's just building those coding ninja skills, practicing these kinds of coding challenges as much as you can. For me, it was every single day, SQL and Python, practicing some coding challenges, and you really do become a coding ninja. It just becomes like second nature to just do all these weird flippy solutions, just because it's stuff that becomes like ingrained. That's a great question, Jennifer. Has anyone done a whiteboarding interview? I've personally never done it, because I've also never done these things in person.
I only ask, okay, one of the organizations that I'm in the interview process with, if I make it, I finish the written assessment, the next is a half day in the office, and it sounds like whiteboarding is a component of that. I think the challenge would be not being, at least in Jupyter Notebook, you have that immediate feedback that, oh, no, you're wrong. So this is something that is just a little new to me.
Yeah, what I would say about that sounds very similar to coding in a text file, which I believe the SQL test for this week, the SQL practice coding challenges that we've included, that's what it will be, right? Last week we used the CoderPad data set, and so you could actually run the cells. This week, the SQL test is just in a text file, and I would recommend and that's a good practice for that. You could also just do any kind of coding where you can't run the cells. That'll build that muscle. Looks like Courtney has to go, but so see ya. Bye, Courtney. If anyone else has any questions, I can stick around. I'm more than happy to stick around for a few more minutes. I guess we could check in. How did those challenges go? Were they super hard, or got progressively harder? How was the vibe?
It was challenging for me, and again, just great to practice not panicking when I couldn't immediately jump into it. So I appreciate that. I have some homework to do over the next week.
Yes, definitely. And practice is everything. Practice is everything. I'll actually share my screen just to go through my last little closing slide here. Practice is 100% the name of the game here. Well, the name of the game is live coding interviews. The way to beat the game is practice. My favorites are HackerRank for SQL, Code Wars for Python. I think I mentioned that last week, but there's tons of options. The key is to practice SQL and Python as much as you can. For me, I was able to carve out at least 30 minutes a day, every single day for SQL, and then 30 minutes for Python. Other things to practice, I mean, you have these coding challenges from today and last week. You could just Google Python interview questions and you'll find all kinds of lists for that. SQL interview questions. There's tons of resources out there. Key is to practice every day. And on the note that you were kind of talking about, Jennifer, I have this mantra: practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. So if you're practicing one way and then you go into a coding challenge and it's just a different environment, the practice might not extend. So when I was practicing, I really tried to pretend it was a real interview, try out some of those communication skills, talk to the wall and explain what you're doing in your code. That was super helpful for me, so that when I got into the real interview, it felt natural. It was what I had been doing for weeks. Cool. Any other questions, comments, concerns before I let you go? Awesome.
That's great.
Well,
Thanks.
yeah, thank you. Thank you all. Feel free to reach out on Slack or LinkedIn. I'm available whenever. Also, we're going to send out a survey. Please, if you get a minute, just fill out the survey. It's like, how useful was this? What would you recommend for the future? Always trying to improve for future iterations of the live coding workshop. But with that, thank you all so much for the time. Best of luck. And again, feel free to reach out at any point along your job hunting journey.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you.
Awesome.
Bye
Take
all.
care.